Welcome everyone to the monthly release kickoff call. Today we'll kick off release 14.3. My name is Anup Dower, Vice President of Product Management. As a reminder, everything we share here is in the context of the package. So in context of that, whatever we share today should be taken with that perspective that we value velocity or predictability. Third thing, you can follow along with us by going on release.kickoff, by going on about.gitlab.com/direction/kickoff page. You will see various issues, videos where you can go deep dive and see what we are working on and contribute to it or provide us comments to make it better. In terms of the order of operations, we will start off today with Ops, which will be led by James Heinbeck, a product leader in Ops section, followed by Enablement, which will be led by Fabian, another product leader in the Enablement team, followed by David, who will cover the Dev section, and then Hillary, who will walk us through the Sec section. With that, take it away, James.
Thanks, Anup. I'm James Heinbeck, the Senior Product Manager for the testing group in the Ops section, and I'll be covering for Kenny today. I'll remind you that the Ops section covers the verify, package, release, configure, and monitor stages, from which I'll be sharing some of the issues that the teams are focusing on in 14.3. First, I want to focus on issues that fit into our larger theme of GitLab hosted first and meeting our availability performance indicator. First up is an effort from the pipeline execution team, who found a background process that was cleaning up stuck jobs, but it was often timing out. This was resulting in an increase in pending jobs and longer wait times for users who kick off pipelines for the GitLab Runner Cloud. So the team is going to be digging into what's causing this timeout to clear out those stuck jobs and decrease wait times all around. The pipeline authoring team discovered that one of the slower endpoints that they were looking at, it was taking up their monthly error budget, was the mirror poll API. Oftentimes, when we have slow endpoints, it's really the heaviest users that are most impacted by that slowness. But in this case, the team found that the majority of users of the endpoint were feeling that slowdown equally. So they're prioritizing research and fixing this so that we can positively impact a large number of users of this endpoint. Next up, the runner team, who found that in some cases, old runner pods just aren't getting shut down and they're not respecting the set timeout period. So this can cause those pods to build up and eventually leads to no new pods being able to start for the Kubernetes executor. So far, the team has been addressing this by manually purging out those old pods, but they really want to get this resolved so that it's not a manual process and users aren't having to wait around for them to be cleared out for their jobs to start. That should ultimately result in less wall clock time for your pipelines. And then wrapping up the focus on GitLab hosted first is an issue from the package team. So the team found that the cache for the dependency proxy could grow indefinitely, which can cause excess storage costs for users. So far, users have been dealing with this by utilizing the API to manually clear their cache or writing their own automation to clear the cache, which works okay, but it's not great. So the team is going to make this less manual for users by implementing a TTL, or a time to live, of 90 days for objects in the dependency proxy. So old items can be cleared out. The team did some research about what some of the common cleanup policies were and found that items older than 90 days and cleaning up every day was the most common setting. So new users of this are going to get a same default to start. The team also wants to implement this now as they're looking at adding support for the Amazon and Google container registries, so keeping that dependency proxy slim and useful before adding even more items to it. Next up, I want to highlight some issues from the section that align with our theme of adoption through usability. First up, the pipeline execution team, who found that the treatment of the add to the merge train button when a previous pipeline had failed just wasn't consistent with the experience of the rest of the GitLab interface. It's important for us and for users that experience is consistent. And so in this case, we found that a modal to alert you that the action that you are about to take is dangerous or could have unexpected results should be the experience. And by adding that, it's a more consistent experience for users who are attempting actions like this across the board. Next up, the testing team is addressing an issue in the test summary MR widget for users of dark mode, which is my favorite theme. When a user who's applied that theme clicks into the details of a failed test, they're presented with a modal that looks like this, which has details about the test, the execution time, and the stack trace, so you can easily debug that failing test. But we found that the system output, as you can see here, just is non-existent. So as a workaround, users would have to copy, paste, or switch their theme, and that's just not a great experience. So the team is going to change this up so that the treatment of this code snippet is the same as everywhere else there's code snippets in the interface for users who have that dark mode applied. Next up, the package team found that the existing GraphQL query or endpoint for the dependency proxy wasn't doing a great job of describing what was available to users who were using that endpoint for discovery. This can make it hard for a team to quickly adopt the dependency proxy in their day-to-day development use cases. So the team is going to create a GraphQL endpoint for the dependency proxy so users can more easily understand what information is available, like the group settings and what is enabled and disabled, URLs, and what stored blobs are out there, along with the digest for them. This should make it easier to understand and to use this as a UI for dependency proxy for teams. The configure team is extending functionality of the CI tunnel for the GitLab Kubernetes agent that was introduced in 14.1. So far, the agent is able to register with a project or with projects to enable deployment and monitoring from projects into the cluster. But if multiple projects in a group want to access that cluster, each of those projects has to be registered. And this setup just isn't easy. So the team is going to enable a way to register at the group level so that any of the projects within a group can access that cluster for deployments and monitoring. The team also found that in the agent listing page, which just lists the agents and allows a user to click in to get details, it just wasn't a great experience for users who were constantly clicking in and out to see the status of agents. So they're going to bring some of those details forward to the listing page, things like the connection status, the Kubernetes version, and more. And by bringing those details to the list page, it'll make it easier and quicker to see which agents are associated with a project, if they're connected or not, and when they last did, as well as other details that administrators need at that high level. And then wrapping up adoption through usability is the monitor team, who's continuing their focus on incident management. Something the team heard from users of incident management is that triaging the current list of incidents was hard and it's time-consuming because it required clicking into each incident to see if it had already been triaged or acknowledged. That was slowing teams down in how they could actually address those incidents. And so the team is going to bring some of those details forward to the list page so that incident response teams can more quickly and easily figure out what incidents have been responded to or at least acknowledged. And that wraps up some of the work that the ops section is kicking off in 14.3. And with that, I'll hand it off to Fabian to walk us through the enablement section.
Thanks, James. These are very exciting new features and changes in the section, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them. All right, I'll walk you through the work that the enablement section is doing in 14.3. And as a quick reminder, the enablement section is responsible for the feature and tools our customers use to run and operate GitLab at any scale. I'm not going to walk you through all of the work that the enablement section is doing, but I'll focus on a few core things that are important to our theme of GitLab hosted first, with a specific focus on SaaS reliability. The first item I'd like to highlight is the work that the global search team is doing on the performance of the count controller. This is a bit abstract, but essentially what it means is that when you search in GitLab, we present you a little result badge here, and sometimes takes up to 15 seconds to actually return. It's costly to actually operate, and our users have to wait. So the search team is doing a lot of work in 14.3 to accelerate the return of these results and make sure that we can return these results efficiently at any scale. The second thing I'd like to highlight is work that is ongoing in the database team regarding the primary key overflow risks on some of our tables. When GitLab was very small, we essentially assigned integers to some of our tables, there's only so many of them available. It turns out that a great thing happened and GitLab continues to grow, and in some specific areas, for example, our CI features, it means that we are getting to the end of our available integers and we need to swap them out for larger ones. I'll show you the impact of the work the team is doing in this little plot here. So for example, for the CI job artifacts, we used up to 75% of the integers available. And this cliff here is the database team actually switching them over to big integers, which gives us a lot of scalability and headroom to grow further, make sure that these tables remain stable. You can see here's another one, which is the CI stages. And so we are working towards actually mitigating all of those tables in 14.3. The memory team is also doing great work in making sure that our Ruby version stays current. We're currently utilizing 2.7. There's a major Ruby upgrade version 3 that has a ton of really interesting features and also a lot of performance benefits. So we're making sure to upgrade to those so that you and also GitLab.com can benefit from running a recent Ruby version. And lastly, this is a longer term effort, something that we're experiencing now specifically on GitLab.com, but also for large instances, is that we need to improve the scalability of our database backend to support up to 10 million monthly active users. And the first iteration of that is to decompose our database. What we're going to do is we're going to take the tables related to a specific feature set, CI, continuous integration. We're going to move it to another database cluster, thereby almost halving the size of the database. This allows us a lot of headroom and scalability so that we can continue to grow and remain stable on .com. So those were the items for the first theme. The second is adoption through usability, and other groups in enablement are doing really interesting work in that area. The first one is something that's also a great example for iteration in global search, where we add a sort by popularity. So when you search in GitLab, you can now not only filter by most relevant, but also by popular upvotes. And this is something we've already delivered for issues. And in 14.3, we're going to actually add the next iteration, and we're going to do this for merge requests. So rather than waiting to ship everything at the same time, the team has done a great job actually doing it feature by feature and rolling these out in an iterative fashion. The next item is to do with Geo, our solution for disaster recovery and distributed teams. And so our large customers are starting to use Git cluster for highly available Git storage. And we need to make sure that Geo and Git cluster work seamlessly. It turns out that the way Geo renames repositories is not working well with Git cluster and can lead to failures and potential data loss. So in 14.3, the Geo team is actually addressing this, and we're going to change how we rename repositories to ensure that Git cluster and Geo work well with each other. And then we're also going to replicate and verify GitLab pages, our way to deploy static web pages. So in a disaster situation, failing over to a Geo secondary should be really easy and straightforward. And until now, pages would need to be regenerated manually by users or sysadmins, which then increases the time to restore all of your services. And in 14.3, we're going to support replication and verification out of the box, which means there's one less thing to do for a sysadmin to restore the entirety of GitLab services when they have to fail over to a secondary instance. Lastly, this is a new market, but I'm very excited about this one. So we've talked about this before in 14.2, but we still have a few finishing touches to get our general available release of GitLab Operator, which would allow us to actually deploy GitLab to OpenShift. And so one of the outstanding items here is, for example, to support all of the production-ready components in the GitLab chart and a few other items that need to be finished. And we continue to chip away at those to deliver the GA release for Operator. And that's it from Enablement. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian. And let's dive into Dev and Sec. So I'm Dave DeSantos, Senior Director of Product Management for the Dev and Sec sections. So to start with Dev, Create is primarily focused on GitLab hosted first. focusing on reliability, infradev, and scalability. So our source code team and our code review teams are actively focused on those items being prioritized. For the GitLab team, they are also focused on GitLab hosted first, though their work here will also benefit large-scale deployments of self-managed instances. They're focusing on improving synchronization between the repository storage and the Prefect database. Today, especially when combined with things like Geo that was just covered in the enablement section, they can get into out of sync state where there ends up being a split brain. So they will be focused on making sure that synchronization works as well as it can. So that way failover, both from a Geo standpoint and a GitLab standpoint, is successful. And to wrap up Create with a focus on adoption through usability, the editor team is focused on continuing to extend our Markdown support within the content editor. For the plan stage, they are also heavily focused on the adoption through usability, as well as GitLab hosted first. The first thing here, we've been talking about work items and creating issue types. The project management team is focused on adding support for those default issue types, which will then enable the product planning team to bring epics down to the project level. For me, this is super exciting. One of the things that allows teams to collaborate is the ability to better portfolio manage. And with the rolling of epics down to project level, that's going to enable that even more for smaller customers. And then to wrap up plan, again, with a focus on GitLab hosted first, they are focused on reliability and scalability, as well as performance of GitLab.com. And of course, that will then benefit large scale deployments customers have within a self-managed environment. Over to manage. Manage is again focused on some adoption through usability, but definitely also focused on reliability as well. The first thing is a small improvement, but has a big impact. The ability to see someone's public PGP or GPG key and be able to download it will now be available off their profile. You can see here will be a new option, little magnifying glass that will allow you to view and download that public key. This is really key for customers who are wanting to do things like signed commits and identifying that the person making that commit is the actual user, and being able to see that public key will make a big impact on that. For the compliance team, they're focused on the continued work to have propagation of merge request approval settings from the group level down to the project level. We talked about this in the last couple of kickoff calls, but to kind of remind you what that looks like. At the instance level, you'd be able to set certain approval rules. You can see here it says, don't allow merge request approvals to be someone who made a commit on that MR. At the group level, that is now inherited and marked that it cannot be disabled. And then here, the team is focusing on bringing these down to the project level. And here you can see in this example, prevent the author of the MR to actually approve it. And then again, here at the project level, you can see it's enabled and cannot be disabled. The other thing that they're doing, which is also very exciting, is supporting the ability to send audit events outside of GitLab. For large deployments, this includes both customers of GitLab.com as well as their own self-managed instances. You can have a lot of audit data if you have a lot of compliance requirements, and that can take up a lot of storage and can potentially lead to slowing down your experience within GitLab. This is going to allow you to send audit logs to an external service. That way they can be kept there for long-term storage purposes. Some requirements are 7-10 years of audit events. That will then be able to be offset to a place where you can have better long-term storage. For the import team, they're focused on improving infradev experience, focused with reliability. But another thing I'm very excited about that they're working on is the improvement of GitLab to GitLab migration. This first part here is being able to generate the projects that are needed as you do a group move. And as they continue to improve upon that, that will obviously then begin to include the actual project data as well. And then lastly, for the manage stage, we added a new group called Workspace since the last kickoff call. This group is doing a lot of work to consolidate the back end of the product so that way we can have better performance and scalability. This first effort here you can see is getting kicked off is the consolidation of groups and projects in the back end. This will allow the propagation of settings that we just showed related to compliance. It's also going to enable faster performance of the product as well, and giving parity between self-managed and GitLab.com experience. So very excited about this. It's a multi-milestone project, but we're getting it kicked off here with 14.3. And lastly, the ecosystem stage. Since the last kickoff call, ecosystem was moved up to a stage. This has to do with the amount of investment we're now putting into our ecosystem capabilities. The ecosystem stage is primarily focused on SaaS reliability for this milestone. However, there's a little bit of work being done that I wanted to highlight. The first is setting defaults on self-managed to match what we're using for GitLab.com. This is a nice usability improvement for our customers. The lessons that we've learned in hosting a very large instance of GitLab will be now benefited to our customers on their setup. So no need to do a lot of trial and error. You'll come in with really good default settings. Part of that investment that I mentioned in the ecosystem is our foundations team. Foundations team is focused on moving all of our components in our UI into our pajamas design system. Long term of this, it'll enable better community contributions. Users will be able to leverage that design system for objects they're putting into their commit. It'll also long term have the benefit of higher performance, as we'll be able to use optimized components throughout the UI. Over to the sec section. So just pretend I'm Hillary as I present this to you. To start off with the secure stage. Secure stage is very much focused on reliability in 14.3 and 14.4 throughout this quarter. First example of this is the stack analysis team is focusing on optimizations of the components that make up their scanners and how their scanners interact with the GitLab instance itself. For those who are not familiar, the security scans run outside the default applications part of the runner, and they interact just like a third party through our ecosystem integrations would do. So they're focused on optimizing that for better performance. There is one thing I am very excited to show you though. We've been talking a lot about our ability to identify and dismiss false positives. So as a part of application security testing leadership and adoption through usability, the first version of this will be made available in the next release. What this looks like is on our first MVC, when the scanner that we've been talking to you about all year identifies something as a false positive, it's going to add a banner here telling you that it's been determined to be a false positive. And then it's giving you instructions on how to action on that and dismiss the vulnerability if you agree. As we continue to optimize that functionality and capability, it'll automatically dismiss it in some of those wireframes we showed you earlier in the year. The Dest team is very
Did we lose David?
development teams to be able to take data as they scan their production application and bring those findings back in to be addressed as part of development.
David, we lost you for the section, so do you mind repeating the last 30 seconds?
Sure. Glad that I'm back though. So we'll go back to here and again, pretend I'm Hillary. So
hey, David, we got that one. It started on the Dest one, the next one.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, great. So now that I'm back, the stack analysis team is about ready to release the first version of our ability to auto-identify and findings as a vulnerability, or as a false positive. We've been talking about this throughout the year, talking about the ability to have us automatically dismiss a vulnerability. In the MVC, we're adding the banner. So as the engine determines that there's a vulnerability that is a false positive, you'll be alerted of that. And then it gives you instructions on how to work through that and dismiss it if you agree. Long term, we will be able to automatically dismiss those as they occur. But as a first MVC, this is a really great step forward for you to begin to get that value. The Dest team has been working on Dest on-demand scheduling for the last couple milestones. Their focus is now taking it beyond the I want this to run next week on Monday, to being able to say, I want this to run every Monday at the beginning of the week, giving you the ability to have that recurrence. The great thing about this is it's going to enable security teams to continue to test applications while they're in production, and then be able to get that same results pulled back into the development side to actively address any vulnerabilities found. The final thing for the dynamic analysis team is extending what we do for site validation. We talked about this previously, that when you run a scan against something in the pipeline, you're scanning the app via the review app. However, for us to scan apps in production, we want to make sure that you are actually the owner of the app and you didn't have a typo. And so we're adding the ability to add a meta tag that the scanner can look for. When it sees that, it knows that the application is supposed to be scanned, it's been approved, and they can run an active scan against it. To finish up secure, back going to SaaS reliability, the Threat Insights team will be spending the next couple of milestones focused on refactoring our store report service. This is the component that takes the results from all the scanners and brings it into the UI. They'll be working on improving that and being able to allow it to scale better. And then finally, and Bobby touched on this when talking about decomposition work as part of the database working group, the Threat Insights team is also working on a bunch of refactoring based off how to optimize for database sharding and database optimization. And then finally, to finish up with Protect, the Protect team is focused on application security testing and leadership and adoption through usability. The first thing to highlight here is our scan policy UI will now have an editable mode for YAML. To kind of show you this, it's actually live on staging for us right now. You can now see which policies have been enabled and are taking effect. You can come in and say, create a new policy, scan execution, and then fill in your Dest information. And that'll then walk you through creating the merge request to set that to an immutable policy that cannot be disabled within the project. That's very exciting. The other component that comes with that is the team is now also working on bringing secret detection into that as well. That's a very big step forward on helping people have immutable policies that can then tie back to your compliance requirements. This is obviously the next scanner in line, and they'll continue to add scanners as well as begin to move that up to the group level. And the last item, we talked about some areas where we're making some key investments. One of those was on our vulnerability check functionality. This is a nice, again, big step forward for usability. You'll be able to, over the next couple of releases, be able to not just have your static rules you have today where you have to set amount of count and it applies to only high and critical. You'll be able to do things such as decide which scanners should have the policy and the approval attached to it, as well as how many vulnerabilities need to be found to trigger that. And of course, being able to set the severity yourself as well. Some really great information off these issues. I highly recommend you check them out. But that's everything from the dev and sec section by both myself and Hillary, kind of the same person today. With that, back over to Anoop.
Thank you, David. I do want to take a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about our focus. As you may have noticed, we are focusing a lot more on performance, reliability, and really security. And the question typically comes at this point, which is, hey, what about features and capabilities? So it's important to understand that all of these things are providing really strong capabilities for our customers. And it's a false sort of choice to think that features are more important than any of these foundational pieces. I want to just also highlight a few of the things the team's already working on. For example, performance, improving GitLab authentication, so we can safely authenticate customers quickly when using source control in our product. Hard to argue that that's not a good value to provide to our customers. Similarly, if you look at verify, improving performance so that we can scale to 20 million plus builds a day, because we think we'll get there in 24 months on our .com platform, but also large self-managed installations might have really large amount of builds a day as well. Security, always front and center and top of mind. Operational improvements around improving the operational use of GitLab cluster, which keeps the system highly available, making it easy, makes it less error prone to accidents or mistakes, keeps your system up and running for all your users. We've also instituted error budgets so that teams have accountability, but more importantly, they can see if they have errors or problems in their area of code, that how does it impact users as an experience, and then they can react to it pretty quickly and immediately so that we can provide highly available experiences to our customers. And then other things like AV deployment of shared runners, which allows reducing the risk of deployments, again, so that unplanned downtimes don't show up on our customer environments, and continuing to improve isolation and reduce reliability issues due to noisy neighbor problems, which is a very common but very complex problem in cloud-based multi-tenant systems. So with that, I'll leave you with the 14.3 kickoff, and have a nice time, and we'll see you again next month. Bye.